was the most technologically advanced and one of the largest bombers of World War II, and the only aircraft that ever used a nuclear weapon in combat. It became a symbol of the American military might in World War II and after. The B-29 Superfortress was a big leap in technology compared to the pre-war designs, though technically the work on this bomber started in the late 1930s as well. It could fly faster, higher, and could carry more ordnance than any other bomber in service before. It was so advanced and complicated for its time that it made every other bomber obsolete, and counting the development and manufacturing costs, it was the most expensive weapon system of World War II, including the Manhattan Project. So let's see how and why this technical marvel was brought to life. Even before World War II, the Army Air Corps already knew that their main heavy bomber, the B-17 Flying Fortress, will not be good enough for the Pacific theater, as its range and bomb load was inadequate. A bigger, better bomber was needed, with higher payload and at least 3,000 miles of range. Boeing started working on a project in 1938, which at that time was a derivative of the B-17 with a pressurized cockpit under the name Model 334. But at this time, as the US was not in war yet, the funding for such a project was lacking, but Boeing continued with their design on their own funds. This has changed not long after, when in 1939 the Army realized the war in Europe is coming. General Harry H. Arnold formed a board to lay down specifications for a new bomber. These specifications included 20,000 pounds of bomb load, 2,600 miles of combat range, and 400 miles an hour maximum speed. 4 manufacturers entered their designs for these specifications. Boeing with their refined design, now named Model 345, consolidated with their Model 33, this later became the B-32 Dominator bomber. Lockheed with their XB-30 design, and Douglas with the XB-31. Lockheed and Douglas soon dropped out from the competition, and Boeing received a contract for prototypes in August 1940, under the designation XB-29. Consolidated also kept working on their design, as it was promising to, and the Army Air Corps wanted to keep it as backup in case the Boeing design fails. Quite in a hurry, the Army Air Corps gave Boeing orders for the production aircraft as well, even before the first flight of the prototype. In May 1941, they gave the order for 14 test aircraft and 250 production bombers, more than a year before the first flight of Boeing's new plane. Although the B-29 was a much bigger aircraft than the B-17, it weighted almost twice as much, could carry more bombs, and it was the biggest and most capable mass-produced bomber of World War II. It was not the biggest in absolute terms. This title goes to the Douglas B-19, which dwarfs even the B-29 with its size. It was almost twice the size of the B-17 and 1.5 times bigger than the B-29, but that plane never went into mass production. If you're interested in the history of other bombers, I have made separate videos on the B-17, the B-24 and on the giant B-19 already. I recommend you check them out, see the links in the description. Manufacturing the B-29 was extremely complex, as it featured so many cutting-edge technology. It featured 2 computerized radar bombing systems, which allowed it to bomb through cloud cover as well, and this was unheard before. It was also equipped with an advanced computer-aided remote-controlled turret fire control system. The plane's central fire control system allowed each gunner to operate multiple turrets and even take one over from another gunner. The built-in analog computer increased accuracy by compensating for airspeed, gravity, temperature, and humidity. The plane also featured fully pressurized front and rear compartments, connected with a tunnel. Using this tunnel allowed the designers to avoid pressurizing the bomb bay. This greatly improved the conditions for the crew, though in combat missions they always had to wear their oxygen masks and protective gear in case an enemy bullet pierces the bomber's skin. The B-29 was the first bomber to feature dual-wheel tricycle landing gear, and it was the first US bomber with a stepless cockpit design. The whole development and manufacturing cost of the B-29 Superfortress adds up to some $3 billion, which is about 1.5 times the amount spent on the Manhattan project. But all these new technologies made the manufacturing troublesome, complex, and most of all, expensive. It is estimated the early production models had a unit cost of around $970,000 each. The very advanced design and the pressure to put it into production resulted in problems in the manufacturing. There were so many changes to the production that almost every finished aircraft immediately gone to modification centers to incorporate the newest features. Interestingly, the most troublesome part of the aircraft was not any of the state-of-the-art new technology marvels, but the R3350 radial air-cooled engines. Though later the problems were fixed, overheating caused serious headaches in the first years, and actually many planes were lost to engine fires. The engine cowlings were too close to the engines, and the big air-cooled engines that lacked airflow easily overheated. Especially true was this on the South Pacific in the hot and humid weather. And if one of these engines overheated and started to burn, putting it out was near impossible, thanks to one of its features, which was meant to save weight, the magnesium crankcase. But luckily, after modifications to the engine and the cowlings, these problems were kept in check, so later B-29s were much more reliable. Now let's see the general technical specifications of the B-29. The plane used the Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engines producing 2,200 horsepower each. It could reach a maximum speed of 357 miles an hour and a cruise speed of 220 miles an hour. The B-29's combat range was an amazing 3,250 miles, while its ferry range was 5,600 miles. Its service ceiling was 31,850 feet. The plane's armament consisted of 10 50 caliber machine guns in remote control turrets and 2 50 caliber machine guns in the tail gunner position. It could carry 5,000 pounds of bomb load over 1,600 miles of range at high altitudes, or 12,000 pounds of bomb load at the same distance at medium altitudes. Its maximum bomb load over short distances was 20,000 pounds. Over the normal bomb load, the B-29 could carry either two 22,000 pound Grand Slam bombs or one 44,000 pound Cloudmaker bomb. And of course the silver plate variants had the ability to carry nuclear bombs, but more of this later. The B-29 had several variants, modifications and specialized versions, so let's take a look at them. XB-29, the first prototype. It first flew on 21st of September 1942. The second prototype crashed in 1943 during testing due to an engine fire, crashing into a packing plant, killing the crew of the plane and 22 workers in the plant. YB-29, an improved version. 14 were built and testing began in summer 1943. This variant featured upgraded engines, new propellers, and were tested with various defensive armament configurations. They tested different gun placements and gun types on it, like a bolt turret on the nose, chin guns, and 20mm cannons. The XB-39 was an experimental version using Ellison V1320 engines. It was only a testbed for the engines to prove the B-29 could still be built if the original Wright R3350 engines would have troubles with reliability or availability. These were followed almost immediately by the B-29 production model. As the new bomber was so needed, the production model was developed in parallel with the B-29 testing. And the first production variant was finished just 2 months after the YB-29 deliveries. The next in line was the B-29A model, which was an improved version featuring new wings and some modifications to the defensive armament. The B-29B was a modification which had almost all of its defensive armament removed when they switched from high-altitude bombing of Japan to low altitudes. Since the fighter threat was minimal over mainland Japan, but flak was still a problem, they hoped the lighter, faster B-29 version has a better chance to avoid it. But more on this when we get to the plane's combat history. The planned B-29D version, or XB-44, was a testbed for the new Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp major engines, which produced 3,500 horsepower each. This variant became the B-50 after World War II and served through the 1950s. The B-29 had several specialized versions as well over the years, so here's a few examples. The XB-29G version was used to test jet engines which were mounted under the fuselage and extended during flight. The B-29 variant was converted to carry experimental aircraft during testing, like the XF-85 Parasite fighter or the famous Bell X-1. These variants were used also in Project Tom-Tom to experiment with wingtip-towed fighters. They carried two F-84 fighters connected to the wingtips of the bomber. Several B-29s were converted to search and rescue aircraft under the name SB-29. They were modified to carry a lifeboat which could be airdropped. They also retained their defensive armament. We also need to mention the Soviet copy of the B-29. When in 1945, 3 B-29s forced to land in the Soviet Union after a bombing raid over Japan, the Soviets decided to keep the aircrafts and reverse engineer them. The resulting Soviet bomber was the Tupolev Tu-4, which was a carbon copy of the B-29. It first flew in 1947 and stayed in service until the 1960s. The B-29 was a late arrival in World War II, as the first production models only left the assembly line in late 1943. While the new plane was just in testing phase, the Army Air Force already had plans for the intended use of it. Initially in 1942 and 43, plans were drawn up to station the B-29s in North Africa and fly missions against Germany, and only transfer to the Pacific later. But by the end of 1943, these plans have changed, and the B-29 was then solely aimed to be used on the Pacific theater. The first combat missions were flown from China and India against several targets on the South Pacific. The very first combat mission in this theater happened on 5th of June 1944, when B-29s from India attacked Bangkok in Thailand. Beginning June the same year, they attacked the main Japanese islands from China until January 1945. By that time the Mariana Islands were captured and airfields constructed on Tinian, Saipan and Guam, so the B-29s moved there. This was a major stepping stone, as from these airfields the B-29s could reach most of mainland Japan. All of these airfields could accommodate a bombing wing, about 180 B-29s on each of them. The airfields on these islands were also easy to resupply and safe from Japanese attacks. They arrived at the airfields in October 1944 and started to fly missions from there at the end of the month. The high-altitude bombing of Japan has started, but the Japanese islands had one defense no one knew about, and this was the high-altitude jet stream, which interfered with the B-29s, and because of them, most of the bombs missed their intended targets. No one expected these strong winds, as no bomber flew missions as high as the B-29s did, approaching the Japanese mainland at around 27,000 feet. The unsuccessful bombing raids at the end of 1944 were the main reason General Curtis LeMay was assigned to lead the B-29 operations. He ordered to cease the high-altitude bombings and opted for medium-altitude missions instead. The result was the well-known firebombing of Tokyo in 10th of March 1945, when almost 300 B-29s dropped 1,665 tons of bombs on the city, burning down 16 square miles and killing around 100,000 people. But the most famous B-29 missions, of course, were the deliveries of the nuclear bombs, so I will dedicate a separate segment for those. Development of the atomic bomb was a great achievement by itself, but the work was not finished when that project was successful. The delivery of the weapons was also a problematic point. Project Alberta was the codename to develop the delivery system for the bombs. This included Project W-47, which conducted ballistic testings to find the perfect shape for the bombs, and Project Silverplate, which was responsible for the modifications needed on the B-29 bombers to be able to carry them. Even though the B-29 was the most modern and biggest bomber of that time, they needed lots of modifications to be able to carry the atomic bombs. Actually, the British Lancasters were considered to be used, as they would have needed less modifications as their bomb bay was enormous. As we can see here, carrying one 4,000-pound and 256 smaller bombs. They were also able to carry the 8 and 12,000-pound bombs without modifications. But in the end, for these important missions, they wanted to use an American plane, so they decided to test and modify the B-29s. The so-called Silverplate B-29s had their bombing bays enlarged so they could carry the nuclear weapons. They were stripped from defensive weaponry, with the exception of the tail gun, and they featured fuel injection and reversible propellers. The prototype plane, the Pullman, had its original bomb bay doors removed, and the bomb bays converted into a single 33-foot space. The long bomb bay was necessary, as the first design of the atomic bombs were the so-called gun types, a long rocket-like shape, as you can see on the picture. These were the so-called Thin Man bombs, which were plutonium-based. During 1944, several test bombing runs were conducted to work out the modifications on the planes, the bomb shapes, and the release mechanism. The first bomb trials revealed erratic descent from the bombs, so several different shapes and fins were tested. After the Thin Man design was abandoned and the uranium-based Little Boy bomb developed, the extensive bomb bay modifications were not needed anymore, as the shorter bomb could fit in the standard B-29 bay. We are not going deeper now into the nuclear bomb project and the Silverplate program, but I plan to make a separate video dedicated to that sometime in the future. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in that. When the decision was made to use the atomic bombs against Japan, the missions were launched from the Marianas, from the Tinian airfield. Though the new shorter bombs could fit in the B-29, they were still very heavy, over 10,000 pounds, and required special equipment to fit in the bomb bay. Here we have the original footage in the background, showing preparations of the Little Boy and Fat Man bombs, and loading them into the Enola Gay and Boxcar B-29s. A loading pit was built in the runway for this purpose. The bombs were delivered on special trailers to the loading area. Where the whole trailer was lowered into the loading pit. The B-29 then parked over it with bomb bay doors open, and the bomb with the trailer raised up into the bomber and secured. The original footage of the bomb preparations and loading is about 15 minutes. I will upload the full footage to my secondary channel, so you will be able to find it there soon. The first nuclear bombing mission was conducted on 6th of August 1945, when the Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from Northfield with two other B-29s to start their 6-hour flight towards Japan. They reached their target in the morning hours with clear visibility of the city, Hiroshima. The bomb was released at 8:15 from 31,000 feet altitude, and about 50 seconds later, it detonated at 2,000 feet above ground. It destroyed nearly 70% of the city's buildings and killed around 80,000 people. The second mission started 3 days later on 9th of August 1945. The B-29 Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, and two other planes took off from the same Northfield in Tinian at 3:49 in the morning. Though he was notified on a non-functioning fuel pump, Sweeney decided to go on with the mission. The primary target for this bomb drop was Kokura. But when the B-29s arrived to their target, it was covered in clouds and smoke from the firebombing of nearby Yahata the day before. After 3 bombing runs, they were unable to drop visually, so a decision was made to move to the secondary target, Nagasaki. The bomber already started to run low on fuel by the time they reached the city, because of the loitering at the rendezvous point and 3 bomb runs over Kokura. Over Nagasaki, they were able to visually identify the targets, and finally they dropped the Fat Man bomb at 10:58, which detonated 43 seconds later at the altitude of 1,600 feet. The result was about 35,000 deaths and half the city destroyed. Because of the faulty fuel pump and delays in the mission, Boxcar was so low on fuel that they couldn't even make it to Iwo Jima, so they decided to head to the Okinawa airfield, where they managed to land with just 5 minutes of fuel remaining in the tanks. Both the Enola Gay and Boxcar are on display today, one in the Smithsonian, the other is in the National Museum of United States Air Force. At the end of World War II, the B-29 production was stopped, and the order for 500 B-29C models was cancelled. The last of these planes was finished on 28th of May 1946. Most of the bombers were put in storage, and many were scrapped as they were not needed anymore. But when the Korean War broke out, they were again called back to service. They started normal daytime bombings against the North Korean industry. But after the Soviet MiG-15 jet fighters appeared in the skies, they quickly suffered heavy losses, and they were switched to night missions. In total, 78 B-19s were lost over Korea during the war. The B-29s were slowly phased out with the arrival of the giant B-36, and their roles taken over by their upgraded version, the B-50, which was in development since 1944. The B-50 project was started as B-29D model to replace the troublesome Wright R-3350 engines with the newer and more powerful Pratt & Whitney R-4360 Wasp major engines. The final B-50 was essentially an upgraded B-29 using the new engines, a taller vertical fin, and new alloys in the construction. The B-29s and B-50s were retired through the 1960s, as the new bombers, the B-47 Stratojet and the B-52 Superfortress were introduced. Today there are 22 surviving B-29s in various museums worldwide. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.